My last episode about Lighter and Princess, I talked about the reasons why I didn't watch the final two episodes. And now I have actually finally finished Lighter and Princess, and I have a lot of thoughts about the finale and the show as a whole. So I guess you can treat this as like a full review of Lighter and Princess. Hi, I'm Monique. I am the host of Off by Purple Heart podcast, where I talk to you about K-dramas, C-dramas, BTS, and whatever else I want to talk about. Lighter and Princess was definitely one of my favorite contemporary C-dramas. I've talked about it twice already on this podcast, and as I mentioned in the cold open or the show intro, I left out watching the final two episodes. So I maybe watched the first part of episode 35. There's 36 in total for this series, and 35 was basically, I watched up to the point where there's a reconciliation between Shu Yun and Li Shen. I just up to that point, and it was because I loved the chemistry so much. The kiss was incredibly passionate. They have very good physical chemistry, and that was one of the things that kept me going with the show, even though at the very beginning it was a very slow start. And the show obviously went through three phases. So their freshman year, and then sophomore year, going into their graduation and into their adult lives, when basically everything kind of erupted. But their physical chemistry in the beginning of episode 35 and the passionate kiss when basically Miss Girl basically erupted her entire public image to get back at Gale, because Gale was plotting as per usual. And I remember how angry that character made me through my first watch through of the show. Him and Feng were just completely nasty work. Like, they were just flat out nasty. And coming back to the show and rewatching the final two episodes in full, it didn't sway my opinion. If anything, I just got just as angry as I was during the first viewing of the show, and I just felt very little sympathy for them. But yeah, Miss Girl basically did the master checkmate move and release incriminating footage of herself, which would put her public persona into question for Li Shen. And I love that she did it like a boss, and that character, she stood 10 toes down. For a character that started off as like the goody two shoes, the quiet, studious girl, she always had a quiet inner strength, even though some of her actions, I guess the youngins would refer to as being a pick-me. But I love that her character was just quietly strong, and she knew what she wanted. And through, her relationship with Li Shen throughout the series, even when it was at its most turbulent and I guess most toxic, he did find a way of getting her to open up and really truly grab what she wants from life, and to finally settle in a career that would basically excel at her strengths and use her intelligence in a way that was satisfying to her, and not just follow through in her mom and her father's vision of her, but particularly the mother. And in the final two episodes, I'm not surprised that the show did not have the most positive reconciliation between her, Li Shen, and her parents. Her mom was an asshole through the original run of the show that I watched, and I like that the show did not let up on the fact that her mom was still an asshole to the very end. I remember when her father backhanded her in the midst of like one of their biggest, most toxic fights because of her, drifting back towards Li Shen. And I think the show was trying to portray that her parents were just very concerned because they thought her behavior was very much out of character, versus her finally coming into her own and coming into her own personality and going after what she wanted. And I remember from that point on, when I saw her father struck her, I was like, I wrote those two characters off completely. I was like, no, F them. And I'm not surprised in the finale, I still felt that same way. I was like, yeah, the mom's still a bitch. And I don't care. It's like, go on, get whatever, blood is not always family. And I like the show didn't wrap that up with a bow. as far as Geo and his trifling ass, and the fact that he was so wrapped up in his bitterness and wanting to beat LeShen one time before his life deteriorated before his eyes. I remember not feeling much sympathy for the character in the original first watch I had of this show, and finally watching these 2 episodes, I didn't feel any more sympathetic towards him. I think the show did a good job in kind of resolving the storyline while still giving hope to the characters. I mean, while he was lying there in a medical crisis and his wife is begging him to receive treatment, he's still asking about if LeShen can come see him. And it just kind of blows my mind. This character had this single-minded, tunnel vision determination to beat him because he just felt so incredibly inferior. He couldn't take any pride in his own intelligence, in his own accomplishments. It's just the simple fact that LeShen beat him at everything and was technically better at him at being a computer programmer, and nothing would stick to him, no matter how destructive his behavior got, and that he indirectly was the reason why his sister ended up passing away. And obviously he expressed a form of guilt in his own way, lying there knocking on death's door. But still, it's just irksome to me that that character had such a single-minded hatredness that came out of his own self-loathing and bitterness. And I remember in my initial watch of the show, I was like, I don't want to see any form of redemption arc for him or the wife. But I even felt bad for the wife because he was becoming abusive towards her, and not just verbally, but in the way he would be very controlling of how she ate. And the fact that he took her on initially as a prize, as much as he liked her in the initial stages of trying to court her, it infuriated him to no end that his wife was infatuated with LeShen. It was just another prize for him to pick off. And, you know, kudos to the actor, but I didn't feel any length of sympathy for that character. And I like in the last moments where there was, in its own way, kind of forgiveness on both parties a little bit. They didn't actually come to meet again. Just as he was to go into OR, he sees in those final seconds LeShen kind of standing off to the side, unbeknownst to anybody, and he just gives him that acknowledgement and that look. So I was like, okay, I guess that's a satisfactory resolution. You know, they've all come to terms that they're all adults, and they've let this bitter war and rivalry almost destroy both their lives completely. And I guess that was probably the best resolution for it all. But all I could think was, wow, he's still the bitter asshole, and I don't feel any lick of sympathy for him. I'm like, he could have died on the operating table for all I care. In the second viewing, like, I was literally cussing as I was watching it. So like, this is why I didn't want to watch the final 2 episodes, because I'm like, I can't believe this character is still so reprehensible. But I think the show did its best in resolving that as well. I will say, as an overall review, I did enjoy the first half of the show a lot more. But what I'll give the second half of the show credit for is that that chemistry never wavered through all stages of the romance, even when it was at its brightest and full of sexual tension, to when it was at its most toxic and its most destructive, to the final peace and calm of them finally coming together. That chemistry was a through line every time that they would be coupley and soft towards one another, and you could see that they were going to have that happily ever after in that ending. The chemistry was just so good. And I'm actually kind of watching like a special behind the scenes of the show, and it's so interesting to me how similar the actors are to their character archetypes, that they're very similar. They're both very introverted in person, but yet that physical chemistry, that, you know, that there's that energy between them, even like in the behind the scenes, you know, gentle teasing, gentle flirty, you know how usual co-stars that get along are like. They still have that really good natural chemistry and good cadence with one another. I just found that interesting. But I loved every moment. Them walking into the new home that LeShen bought, them cuddling on the couch, their very low-key wedding with everyone from the new company that's now going to be referred to as LP coming together for them to get their marriage certificate. It just seemed very them to have a very practical, straightforward marriage. They've basically been married from the time that they've met one another. They've just completely been utterly entangled in one another. And they brought out the best in one another, they brought out the worst in one another, but the two characters were extremely well defined on their own. They both had their own personal growth, their own personal journey. They both had heaps of trauma, and were still able to come together and have this happy ending and just have a quiet marriage. And I love the celebratory, barbecue afterwards. And there's that one shot where LeSean's kind of looking out the window and he's staring at the love of his life, and he might have regrets, and he'll never truly admit to some of the more venomous behavior that he engaged in for the sake of an ego stroke. But it's just like the fact that it all came together to this. Finally he could lift his head up from the water and take a breath. It was very quietly poetic. So all in all, I did enjoy the series a lot, and just picking up the last 2 episodes, even though it's been a while back since I watched Lighter and Princess, and having all those feelings still come back up, shows me that, I really enjoyed this show in this first run. It wasn't just like a moment in time. I still walk away with it enjoying the experience, and I probably will, most likely in the future, rewatch it again, because it was enjoyable. And definitely there is some key moments that I really enjoyed. As I said, I enjoyed the first half a lot, and I still think of that scene where he backs her up into a bookcase. He's staring down at her. To me, that was the rawest, most sparkling amount of chemistry I've seen in a while. Just the physicality of it, I know that's a thing in a lot of romance, especially with het romances, where the male lead has to be extremely tall and looms over the actress, and he'll back her up into the wall. It's very tropey. It's done a lot, but there's something about in this show when it was done, there's something about it that takes your breath away. That I felt that chemistry in that moment. There's just little moments like him calling her out when they were working together in college in that group. She was ignoring him, and then he walks right over, and he gets right into her personal space and just starts reaching over her to type out something or to do some form of coding, and the look of shock on her face, the chemistry in that, they found this way of making casual intimacy that much more hot. I don't know how they did it. It's just certain actors, they just have a certain spark. There's just something about the energy around them. Even if they're doing something that isn't really all that spicy, it still kind of resonates with you. It's just a moment in time that I really enjoyed with the show. But I think the show will still be good on rewatch, and I'm just surprised by how much emotion came back up me rewatching those final 2 eps. So I just wanted to make a quick, well, in my opinion, quick. These podcast episodes are never really that quick, about my final thoughts on the show. Anyways, thank you for tuning in. I got a lot more coming down the pipeline. January is a very busy month with a lot of shows on the pipeline, and I assume for February as well it's going to be very busy. If you're watching this via YouTube, thank you so much. Please share, please subscribe. If you're listening via Spotify or Apple Podcasts, I appreciate you so much. And till the next episode, bye.